Got it, Brenda? All right, Paul, here we go.
Hey everyone. Okay, so motion 1 is to approve adding zonal delegates from seated zones to the settler and truster of the Fellowship Intellectual Property Trust, FIPT. So the intent is to reflect the decision at WSC 2018 to make delegates from seated zones, voting WSC participants, and honor the 6 months fellowship review of this proposal that occurred from December 2020 through May 2021. And the policy affected would be are from pages 1 and 2 of the FIPT addendum and addendum A. And addendum B shows the changes.
Matt.
My question on this one and the way it was done, so that throughout most of the documents, you simply removed the word regional from where it mentioned regional delegates, and then had that one blurb in the middle that you showed on the next slide where it defines what a delegate is. Was part of the reason for doing it that way is to allow it to be more fluid if the conference does change what qualifies as a delegate at the conference, that you then only have to change the one line instead of everywhere that it's referenced throughout the documents?
Yeah, so that's correct. It's mainly like housekeeping, changing. So it's a lot of it is housekeeping. You are correct. A lot of it is.
Any questions on that? Questions?
Any other questions?
And we can always go back to any questions that come up later on.
Yep, I think we're good. Let's go on to the next one. Motion 2.
Give me a minute, Barry.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of stuff in on these.
Yeah, do you guys want us to read the whole PowerPoint, or do you want us to go straight to the motion? It's up to you guys.
I think the room's just saying go straight to the motion. A lot of people have already gone over a lot of these.
Okay.
Is there anybody online that would like it all read? Not hearing any objection. Here's motion 2.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for that decision. I'm glad that everyone's done their homework. So motion 2 is to approve the revisions to the FIPT operational rules contained in addendum B. And the intent is to revise the operational rules to reflect discussions at WSC 2018 about the inspection of trustee activities, and to reflect current practices, terms, and language.
Matt.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm jumping in a lot on these, but these are, if you know the region that I serve, being South Florida region, you know a little bit of our history with these particular motions. And the question that I get a lot on these, and that I'm seeing around the conference participants as well, is the original wording on this didn't just have how we initiated an inspection request, but it also provided a process for how that inspection request was done. And these changes remove the process for once it's approved. And I get a lot of questions about why that was done, and how, if an inspection request ever was approved by the conference, that how would we decide how that would be done now, since it's no longer specified in these actual documents any longer, should this pass.
Thanks, Matt. That's a good question. The reason why the motion is written in the way it is because two members of the World Board Executive Committee sat down with the motion, which sat down and discussed this quite clearly. And I think if you look at it, there is a change to the way that I'm sorry, everything is jumping around. I can't really work with things flashing. Could we go back one slide, please? Thank you. The reason for this is so that we are clearer about changing our excuse me, changing our process to be more, I guess, conference friendly, I guess is the best way that I would describe this. So I'm not sure that this change would actually make it less clear about what the process is. Could this perhaps you could enlighten me on your question?
This changes the process to initiate an inspection request to the exact same way that it was actually done in 2018, which was contrary to what the document stated it should have been done. But we do understand that that is a lot more conference friendly. But my question isn't referring to that. Later on in the document, prior to this, and the way the document's written right now, it states that once an inspection request does happen, that it states who does the inspection, a representative from the region, 2 board members, and support staff to assist them with that. All of that is removed in this. This only now gives information on how to approve an inspection request. It no longer provides any information about how the inspection request would actually be carried out once that happens. All of that wording has been removed. So that's what my question refers to is, how does that happen now since that's no longer specified? Or how is a decision made about how to do that since there's no reference to that anywhere in the document if this passes?
I see. Thank you very much for that clarification. Well, this changing the method and the process of inspection as to who raises the inspection actually is now passed over to the World Surface Conference. So the World Surface Conference would, as I understand, follow the same process for the inspection if the conference decided that an inspection was necessary. So it's not, I don't think it's a case of removing the protocols for the inspection. I think it's just a question of streamlining the FIPT so that all the things, the whole initiation process is handed over back to the World Service Conference. Does that help? That's my understanding of it.
I mean, it really still doesn't explain because the document no longer gives how the process would happen after it's approved, but I understand that there just doesn't really appear to be an answer for that. We would hope they would follow the same thing, but there's nothing any longer holding anyone to that. I mean, the way this is written now with that removed, we could approve an inspection request and then the board could go inspect themselves and just release a document stating what they looked at without any other auditors involved in it whatsoever. Well, inspectors rather. So that was the concern, was that, I mean, the inspection request was there so that the fellowship could actually see whether or not their concerns were valid, and the inspection request that was done did find, in fact, valid concerns. I mean, they weren't that big a deal. They were mostly communication issues in the end, but without it stating who would be involved in the actual inspection, you're opening the door for people to just kind of go do it however they please in the future, is the concerns that I'm getting.
I understand. That's quite a sinister reading of the changes. And of course, it would be, I think it would mainly accepted that the World Board would not just say, yep, we've looked at it, it's okay. That's certainly not the intention of this at all. It is simply a way for the conference itself to be more involved in generating an inspection, which would follow the same system. I mean, and if it's not explicit in the changes, then that's something that we will have to discuss clearly.
And I do
Matt,
understand.
if I could, like, I would just add something. So when we give it back to the World Service Conference, I would imagine that we follow the same process as we bring anything to the body. And if we get the votes and all of that, I believe it will follow, you know, in my imagination, it would not be the board doing the inspection to themselves, to the organization. It would be the World Service Conference. And that could probably be a project plan or something that happens based on what we're inspecting and all that. So it's not that we're removing the process. It's just that we're putting in the process the same as every other process, and we're making it a WSC, you know, decision. And it'll probably follow any other process, like a project plan or something like that. People involved, delegates involved, and all of that. It won't be just the World Board by themselves.
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean,
thank you. And,
I think the difference is here we're conflating an inspection with an internal audit. This is certainly not an internal audit, and there is no mention of it being that. It is actually an inspection, and we would be following the same processes once an inspection request has been approved by the World Service Conference in the same way that we did. But as you say, if it's not exactly explicit and it raises suspicion, that's something we're going to have to talk about.
Yeah, and I thank you for that. And I do want to say that, I mean, these are concerns that my region brought to me. I trust the current board that we have today that would not do the way that this is being described. I fully believe that in my heart. But they asked me to make sure that I raise these particular questions, so I'm doing so.
Yeah, of course. We appreciate that, Matt. Of course, every question is welcome. We actually would like you guys to ask questions. We appreciate them. And I also see Brenda's asking, how will we know this as groups? So if the inspection if the inspection request has been made, and the WSC makes a decision, then like anything else, like any other project plan or any other thing that the board works on behalf of the fellowship, we come back to the fellowship with everything and present it as requested. So just like it was requested, it'll come back to that. And that's basically how we'll know. It'll be reported and everything. Does that answer the question? I can't hear anything, but I hope so.
Yes, thank you so much.
Sorry.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Kelly?
Kelly, so how I'll present this in the workshops that I'll be conducting, and if this question comes up that the method was removed, one, you could look at it in a negative light with conspiracies attached to it, but there's also the other side, and the other side is that by removing that, you allow the inspection team to be able to tailor the inspection method specific to the issue that's being inspected. Yeah. So that way, and in addition to that, by the time that this inspection rises to the level of a car motion, everyone in the fellowship will know all the laundry will be out there for everyone to see, and everyone will know all the details of what the issue is and why it has not been addressed. And by the time if it rises to that level and gets approved by the conference, there will be a very clear expectation of the group to initiate the method that will be tailored to resolve the issue through the inspection. So being able to decouple a specific method so that it can be tailored to address the issue gives the fellowship more flexibility to bring this to conclusion.
If I could just jump in for a second.
Over.
There's on page 37 under the reader's notes, there's a little bit, I don't know, it clarifies things for me a little bit more. And really the original inspection request that was presented by the South Florida region did not address a specific concern. It was more of an array of 10 different things that wanted to be inspected, of which 5, I believe, were addressed, because the other 5 did not really fall into the criteria of what would be like normal under an inspection request. So because the motion is shifting the responsibility to the WSC, the reader's notes mention what is the specific concern? Why is the usual amount of information that is presented in line with being a nonprofit organization and our responsibility as World Board members to already have oversight over NA World Services? I mean, that's literally the description of the trusted servant position. So there's a level of concern beyond what a trusted servant's responsibility would be. For example, if I were the coffee maker and I'm not cleaning up afterwards and I'm just leaving the meeting, you might want to address a specific concern. So I think Kelly kind of said it already, but this now becomes in the form of a motion where after you've exhausted all of the possible avenues for addressing the concern, the last recourse is filing, creating a motion and outlining the specific concerns. And then, as it mentions in the reader's notes, looking at what resources and methodologies would best accomplish facilitating completing that inspection request versus outlining a series of things that may be overkill for that specific concern being addressed. Oh, sorry, Pam, that was, yeah. So it's actually page 37 in the FIPT, it would be updating, but it would be addendum B, and the actual page in the car is page 165.
Thank you. Jim?
Thanks, Barry. I don't know if you or Pam could share your screen and show slide 19. I think it might help clarify this. It's kind of explained there. And it speaks directly to the inspection clause. So slide 19.
Which way am I going?
Backwards.
I don't know which one is 19 at this time.
You're on 27 right now, so there, stop. Yeah. So here, Article 5, Section 3, these are the changes. So I believe that the existing language was too restrictive. And what we already know about our experiences in service with policy, that sometimes policy is that way. It doesn't allow for latitude or addressing whatever the situation is to not have to have a one-size-fits-all type thing. So the change here is that red at the bottom, once the decision is made, the details of the inspection would be decided by the WSC. So once the WSC decides, okay, we're going to have an inspection, instead of going to restrictive policy that was in place that may not serve the situation, at that point in time, the details are decided by the WSC. How detailed the inspection should be is made at that point in time. And that way it addresses whatever that circumstance is at the time and not a blanket policy of a restricted structure that's followed every time.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I can start here. So the use policy and intellectual property bulletin number 1. So the board is also recommending changes to the use policy, which is described in the intellectual property bulletin number 1. And the bulletin spells out the conditions under which groups and service bodies can use and reproduce NA's recovery literature and registered trademarks. So the board is suggesting a substantial rewrite of the bulletin, which makes it difficult to read the version of the document that has the proposed changes tracked. So a clean version of the proposed text is in Addendum C, and track changes of the bulletin is in Addendum D. So just to give you a brief summary of the most significant changes to the bulletin, it would be permission would be required to reprint book length pieces. This is the only significant policy change that is being recommended to the use policy. And current policy that was not clearly expressed in the bulletin has been added to the text. Groups are only allowed to reproduce currently approved versions of recovery literature, as that is all that NAS is authorized to publish and distribute. And this permission does not include electronic or online formats. These are not changes in policy. They are revisions to better reflect current policy. The introduction has been rewritten, and the section on copyright has been moved ahead of trademarks. Some copy editing changes are proposed as well, such as using the term policy throughout the document rather than a mix of policy and guidelines. So these bullets, these are the most significant changes, and the remainder of the suggested revisions to the intellectual property are not changes to the policy. They're just copy editing to reflect already reflect policies that are already in place. And we're also adding some language to make it clear that permission does not extend to online or electronic versions of the literature. What else? Okay, I think that's it. And so the motion 3 reads to approve the revisions to NA Intellectual Property Bulletin number 1 contained in Addendum D. And the intent is to revise this bulletin so that it provides more direct and clear guidance, and so that it reflects current practices, terms, and language. The bulletin has been largely rewritten, and a clean copy of the bulletin with proposed revisions is contained in Addendum C. Copy tracking is in Addendum D.
Any questions? We have one back here.
I just wanted to clarify, I believe this is true, that a book length piece or that a full spiritual principle a day or just for midday reading is considered a book length piece, right? One day. I have a couple questions and I want to confirm.
I'm really sorry, I couldn't hear that question. It was a little bit of echo.
It's the mic, Patty.
One day, a of a just for today reading or a spiritual principle a day reading is considered a book length piece. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I believe so. Correct me if I'm wrong, Paul or Danny.
Danny?
Yeah, that's correct. A full
Yeah.
book length piece is 25,000 words or a single JFT or SPAD entry. That's what's being proposed.
So if a group or an area wanted to publish the just for today reading on their website, they should ask for permission from NAS in order to do that, correct?
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple ways to approach that. Typically, for example, and I'm pretty involved in the, outside of my service at World Services, I've been very active in the BMLT community. The BMLT community developed a plugin for WordPress sites that allows pulling the JFT and SPAD directly from NA.org. And that is an approved method of displaying the JFT or the SPAD because it is pulling directly from those sites that are controlled by NA World Services. It ensures that we can maintain the fidelity of the Narcotics Anonymous message, which the fellowship cares very much about. The other approach would be to direct link to those sites, jftna.org or spadna.org, which would again ensure that you're seeing a single JFT or SPAD reading for that day, which falls in line with an acceptable use of that material. There's also the emails that go out as well.
And you could copy and reprint an email? Why not just link right direct? I didn't know that the SPAD one was out yet. So SPAD@NA.org.
Spadna.org is out, yeah. Printing an email, I suppose printing a single email is, okay. I mean, if you're not 100% sure, and I'm not, I would simply email wb@na.org and get a clarification.
So if they're directly linking to that site, no need to request permission.
That's correct. Or using one of those plugins, the Fetch JFT and Fetch SPAD plugin. Also, there's a delegate on here who actually wrote those plugins. His name's Patrick J. And if you want more information about those plugins, I'm sure he would love to answer your questions about it. Or Jonathan, who's also on here, who's the AD for North Carolina region.
Thank you, Danny, Jonathan, and Patrick. You've been so helpful to Minnesota on our website. Can't thank you enough for your service. I just am not grasping this. This permission does not include electronic or online formats. Could you just elaborate on that? It's not registered.
Yeah, I think the challenge with, so many years ago, if you remember, I think it was pre 6th edition basic text, so pre WSC 2008, there was a PDF that was put out by World Services of the 5th edition basic text, and it was posted for free online. And what we found in short order was that a lot of really interesting things happened. I mean, to the point where the literature was changed. It was sold on Amazon.com by members, sold on eBay. And that represented challenges to us because, again, the World Service Conference and the Fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous cares very much about their literature and wants to ensure that there's a single fellowship approved message and that there aren't these other different versions that change the language around. And so because PDFs are not, they don't contain things like digital rights management, it becomes very difficult to track where the PDFs are going. And when I say PDFs, just in general, electronic formats that are not e-literature books, you can't control the proliferation of or I won't say control, but satisfy what the conference has asked the trustee to do, which is to keep the fidelity of the Narcotics Anonymous message. And so I think it was at WSC 2008 or 2010, the World Board asked the conference if, should we probably take these things down? And the conference agreed, but we never updated bulletin number 1 to reflect that decision. So this kind of goes along with, a lot of the things that happened during the pandemic, and also just kind of keeping the bulletin number 1 in line with the philosophy that we've been practicing, which is that, the only way we could really satisfy what the fellowship has asked us, which is to keep the fidelity of the Narcotics Anonymous message, is to use things like e-literature, where you can sort of do that digital rights management, but at the same time, try to protect ourselves legally with having that language in the bulletin if something should arise in the future regarding these different, let's say out of band digital versions.
Thank you. Brenda?
Yes, good morning, everyone. I was on here yesterday too, and it was very, very good. I learned a lot yesterday. But if you guys can, because I'm visual, and I don't know how many other people are visual, and also this is my first time of being in this part of the process. If you guys can, some of the motions, if you guys can also read the intent and the rationale are what the World Conference said, like we did yesterday. I think I get a clear understanding of the motion, and I've taken notes, and I can take it back to my home group that at my area and region. I think it was very, very good. It was the way they presented it yesterday was very, very good. So a lot of times, a lot of talking, and I'm kind of lose what you're talking about. If you guys could like point it out on on the slides or whatever, that would be helpful for me. I don't know about nobody else, but for me it would be helpful. I do understand that the people who are there in person that was there heard it yesterday, but then you got a lot of new people on here today did not hear it. That's why they're here. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy?
Hey y'all, my name's Andy. I'm an addict. So I'm not sure who would be the one to answer, but I also was questioning about the online electronic literature, and like I of service on a subcommittee of a subcommittee of the UK region, and we have 2 meetings a day, 7 days a week, and some of the meetings will be on like just for today, and a lot of times they'll show straight from their email, so it's like you could see the copyright, blah blah blah. But I mean, there's sometimes like we'll use like a PDF of it works how and why. And I mean, I could say like, I don't know where that PDF has come from. And so is with this particular one, that speaking about the electronic versions, is there some way that like our subcommittee, whatever, the region could purchase these items electronically, and then we could still use it as it is like we are the subcommittee of this? Does that make sense? Like, is that something that makes sense? Or do we even need to do that?
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. Like when you open that PDF, you don't know where it came from and what things may or may not be changed. So the only way that I know that I could guarantee that it would be what we as a fellowship approved is to go to the link I put in the chat, or for those that can't see the chat, it's na.org/elit. and purchase it from one of those authorized distributors. And that way there's a way to guarantee that it's not potentially tampered with.
Wonderful. Question to the organizers. This is being recorded. Is there any way we could get a copy of this recording? Sorry, I don't know if this is the right time to ask.
Yes, it's being recorded, and the links have been put in the chat. The
I
links from
really wanna-
yesterday. The links from yesterday are all the way up the top of the chat. It'll also be available on the Plain States Zonal website, and I believe also the US Zone stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys.
Any other questions? And Southeastern Zonal Forum website also as well. Thank you, man. Nate.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nate, and I'm an addict. So I just need some clarity. So in some of our groups, what we do for a Just for Today format, we go online and, you know, for a virtual meeting, we go online and pull up the Just for Today off of the NA World website, JFT, NA, whatever the rest of the languages for that. So that is correct in doing so, to display that for use in our meetings?
Yes, that is an acceptable way to use those readings.
Okay, I need it. Thank you. Appreciate that.
We got one here.
My name is Brenda, and I'm the delegate for Nebraska. I understand this motion, and what I have heard from the fellowship is we love having Just for Today on the NA app. When are they going to put the SPAD on the NA app?
Yeah, I'll bring that feedback back to you, Brenda. Was that Brenda?
Yeah.
Hey, Brenda. Yeah, I'll get an answer. It occurred to me a few weeks ago, but I think I didn't want to ask because the staff was working on getting the cat out, and I didn't want to distract them. But yeah, I'll get an answer for you on that. I don't think it's a heavy process, but yeah, that's a good point.
Thank you. All right, next motion. You ready, Brenda?
I am.
Thank you, Brenda. So this is a motion from the World Board regarding virtual meetings. Shall we move to the next slide, please? Okay, I hope, and I'm pretty sure that we're all really aware of what happened to our meetings because of the global pandemic. So we don't need to really, I think, dwell on here. I'm sure everybody's really clear about this. Should we go on to the next slide? And this was the results of a survey that was taken with the fellowship. The question was, do you believe that virtual meetings meet the criteria to be NA groups as listed in the group booklet? The response was 82% yes, 10% no, not sure, 8%. That's quite a clear mandate from the survey. Go on next, please. And from NORS News, July 21, each service body is free to make their own decisions about member groups, all areas, all regions. The question of whether to recognise virtual meetings as groups at NA World Services is a different type of decision that must be made by the NA Fellowship, as given voice by the regional and zonal delegates at the World Service Conference. This does not and should not affect local decisions by service bodies to recognise these meetings as groups. Next slide, please. So this motion asks the fellowship to the conference to consider whether to acknowledge that an NA meeting that meets regularly in person or virtually can choose to be an NA group if they meet the criteria described in the group booklet, including the 6 points for an NA group, and are consistent with NA philosophy as expressed in our traditions. And footnotes will be added to the group booklet and the guide to local services, reflecting the decision of the WSC if this motion passes, and referencing virtual meeting basics as a possible resource. And the intent is to recognize NA groups that meet virtually, including online and by phone. So is there any discussion or questions about this motion, please?
Lillian.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to know, for the virtual groups, I mean, as far as like the service structure, would they just join the service structure that's already in place?
That would be up to the service structure. This is a
Okay.
motion, this is just a motion from the World Board for the fellowships to decide whether an NA meeting that meets regularly or virtually can choose to be an NA group. It's about the group choosing. And so it would be about the service structure, a service structure, again, deciding whether to do that or not.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we're ready for the next one then.
Okay, so the next motion is about revising the vision for NA service. And as you've all seen, the previous car motion that was talking about having a more gender neutral and inclusive, about investigating the changes. And because a vision for NA service is not NA literature, it would not be a part of this process if that motion passes. And basically, we've seen that gender and language and NA literature is a huge topic, and the World Board does hope that the fellowship will decide to take up this conversation in the upcoming cycle. And because there are so many motions in the car, the board wasn't sure whether they wanted to actually include motion 5, but they decided because 83% of conference participants wanted us to go ahead. So motion 5 reads to revise a vision for NA service, changing the phrase his or her own language and culture to the phrase their own language and culture. And if this motion passes, a vision for NA service will be revised in future printings, including in fellowship approved recovery literature. The intent is to revise the vision statement to be more inclusive, and the policy affected. If this motion is adopted, a vision for NA service would be updated wherever it appears in service material and fellowship approved recovery literature. In addition, the reference and guiding principles will be revised, and we will basically deplete all existing stock of service material and recovery literature and revise in future printings.
Any questions? Yep, we have one here. Can you stand up, Denny?
Stand up.
I know.
Yes, I asked earlier.
Yeah, Denny, recovering addict. As we run out of copies of the 6th edition basic text, would this require a revision to the 6th edition, or would it require a new edition?
So anywhere this is referenced, we would deplete what we have now and revise it in the future.
Daniel has a good question. This isn't, it's not in the basic vision.
Yeah, it's in guiding principles.
It's not in the basic. It's not in the basic.
That's one.
It's okay.
Any other questions?
Daniel had a good question.
Andy.
Hi, Andy Edic. Sorry, the last question actually just confused me a little bit. So this particular motion is only speaking about the document, the vision, what did you call it? Vision something. Vision of
Vision
service,
for
yeah.
NA service.
Yeah. So this is not anything to do with basic text, Itware Townwide, la 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 la.
No, it's
all
not
of
basic text. It's referenced in guiding principles.
okay, cool. I thought so. I was just like got confused.
In the chat,
Thank you.
You're welcome. In the chat, we have from Daniel, does that make the vision statement fellowship approved?
Yeah.
What? Will this motion make the vision statement fellowship approved? Because right now, it's just board approved or serving.
Did the board get that?
No, I didn't. Sorry, I didn't hear. Was there a question?
No, okay. Does that make the vision statement fellowship approved, this motion?
Yeah.
Answer is yes. Got a question?
Rod. So this wasn't developed and approved literature process like you were talking about yesterday, where a piece of literature was not done through the literature process. This would make it fellowship approved.
Could I answer that? This is not a piece of recovery literature.
Yeah, it's not NA literature.
Okay, I'll buy that.
So it doesn't come under
People
the
will
same
say that.
as our recovery process. Does
Published
that?
in the guiding principle, people will take it.
So I think there's a better, I think Paul and Hamid kind of, covered it, but just to kind of put this out there, there used to be a vision for NA World Services that was in a guide to World Services. And I believe it was WSC 2010 that there was a CAR motion created by the World Board to make the vision statement a vision for all of Narcotics Anonymous. But it was not, it's not a piece of recovery literature that goes through the fellowship approval process like SPAD or the basic text. The motion suggests that the vision statement is referenced in a piece of fellowship approved material, which is in guiding principles. So it doesn't make the vision statement fellowship approved, although updating the guiding principles book is a FIPT action. It's not making the vision statement fellowship approved, like recovery literature. So because the motion was out there a decade ago or so, it would be probably not right to have World Services change the vision statement without asking the fellowship, since the fellowship decided that this is their vision statement now. So we're just kind of following, the precedent of, asking the fellowship if they agree.
Danny, if I could just add to that, another example might be, for instance, every conference, we ask the conference to approve the budget. The budget is not a piece of recovery literature. The budget still has to be approved by the fellowship through the conference. Does that make it clear? There are a number of things that we ask for approval which are clearly not recovery literature. This is an interesting one, as Danny says, because it is included in a piece of recovery literature, but it's actually it's just included to make it available to all the fellowship. That's all. It's not actually in itself a piece of recovery literature or refers to recovery. Does that make it clearer, Danny?
Yes, Matt?
I think it might help with some of this to just describe real quickly the basic differences between the three types of literature. We have fellowship approved, conference approved, and board approved, and just give people an idea of what each of those means and how they're decided.
Okay, I'll do my best to do that. And I'm sure my colleagues will help me if I find myself going in the wrong direction. So firstly, fellowship approved literature is the process by which we create and approve recovery literature. Now, that is done by the fellowship actually having a part in the generation of literature, basically writing it themselves, reviewing it themselves, editing it, and bringing it to the World Service Conference for approval. So that's fellowship approved literature. Am I right there? I think I am. Okay, so next is conference approved literature. Now we're talking about literature which is actually not recovery literature, which goes through that process, because our FIPT says we have to follow a process to create or change fellowship approved literature, to create or change conference approved, to create or change fellowship approved recovery literature. Conference approved literature is, as I said, it could be something as simple as the budget report, for instance, which the conference looks at and says, yes, we actually approve of this, we agree with this. That is conference approved. The Guide to World Services, which is usually amended every conference, is also a piece of conference approved literature. It's not a piece of recovery literature, it's a piece of service literature. So it's either about things which are information and service that the conference takes hold of and approves or does not approve. The third one, board approved literature, are such things as the World Board Bulletins, which I'm sure some people have actually come across. We don't tend to write World Board Bulletins anymore. We much prefer to actually ask the fellowship to approve Narcotics Anonymous World Service literature as being having ownership by the fellowship itself. Danny, Hamed, have I made that clear enough? Okay, everybody else, I hope that's answered the question and clarifies the situation a bit.
Lillian?
I'm so sorry, because maybe I didn't understand, but so when it was in the car in 2010 and we all voted for it, and if the RDs and the ADs took it back to their regions and the regions took it to the areas and they took it to their home groups, didn't that make it fellowship approved?
Well, no, it didn't, because we weren't, we didn't take, it wasn't written by the fellowship for a start. It wasn't edited by the fellowship. It was simply approved. Does that make sense? Approved by the fellowship.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Does that make it a bit clearer?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. All right, any other questions? One back here. Can I have you stand?
Patty. I guess since we have some time, I will beat this horse again. So if I could try to gain a better ability to articulate this distinction about, I believe yesterday we talked about service material being able to be edited by the World Board. Edited, produced, approved. Is that accurate?
It can be edited by the board, but it is taken to the conference. That makes it conference approved rather than fellowship approved.
And this just speaks to a desire of many groups in my region to be able to, and it's going to be part, if the conference approves our motion that we were talking about, Sweden's motion, this falls into that category, but the importance of having introductory reading cards that are gender neutral and welcoming and inclusive is a thing to many groups. And it's a member's first introduction to NA, and we all know as newcomers, we want to disqualify ourselves in any way we can. So this introductory reading cards can fall within service material category. No.
Because they are right out of the basic text.
So they're reading.
Yeah, the reading cards.
Service materials for world service.
Sorry, would you like me to answer that? The reading cards are actually
great area in there to work with.
I'm sorry. Could I just say that the reading cards are extracted from recovery literature, which is fellowship approved literature?
Certainly they are. And the actual reading cards that we sell are service materials. So just adapting those, we're still quoting directly from the basic text, even if we're disclaiming them. I'm just wondering if I don't know if that was just one approachable issue in the whole topic of developing literature that's gender inclusive. Just I'll just leave it at that. Thank you for explaining. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Thanks, Patty. Any other questions? Okay, next one.
Hamid, is this you or me? I've lost. Is this me? I think it's me. Okay, I think it's me. Anyway, I will take just the fact that I'm older and more forgetful to go ahead and do this then. Okay, motion 6, revising translation policy so that language communities that have published personal stories in the Little White Book be allowed to include up to 6 of those locally developed stories in a section of their translated 6th edition basic text. Next, please. Okay, so as I'm sure we've seen, there have been a number of Little White Books published by different regions, including some of their own stories, and some of those stories have made it into the 6th edition of the basic text. Next, please. So the motion says to approve a change to World Services translation policy in the Guide to World Services in Narcotics Anonymous to allow the possibility for up to 6 locally developed personal stories to be included in translated 6th edition basic texts if the stories have first been published in the Little White Book of that language. These stories will be placed in their own section in Our Members Share with the following language preceding them. A Vision for NA Service looks forward to a day when addicts round the world have the opportunity to experience our message in their own language and culture. In pursuit of that vision, communities or language groups that have published local stories in the Little White Book may include up to 6 of those stories in the basic text if they chose. These, fill in the number, stories were originally published in the, fill in the language, Little White Book in, fill in the year. Next, please. And the intent of this motion is to better reflect our vision that every addict in the world has the chance to experience our message in their own language and culture, in our primary text, in the basic text. Policy effective is in Guide to World Services NA, page 42, and the affected policy can be found on page 25 of the conference agenda report. Next, please. Okay, I don't think I need to read the motion again, but I will happily if anyone wants me to, or the intent. Shall we open to questions now? Or discussion?
Any questions, discussions?
I love this one.
All you have here is affirmatives.
Okay, well, if I could just take the opportunity to give a bit of background to this. The first Little White Book that actually had local stories in it were the anglicized English version of the Little White Book, which was produced as because there was a protest from the Great Britain and a number of its colonies that they didn't like the spelling that the American and Canadian basic text in Little White Book had. And so they decided they would like one with their own spelling in it, and they wrote their own stories. This is a piece of approved NA literature. I find it quite funny that if you go onto the NA.Org website and look for literature, you can either have literature in English or English anglicized, and English anglicized just being so funny to me, really. But there we go. This is what we do in Narcotics Anonymous. So this would mean that there is an English anglicized version of the basic text available, and this would mean that those stories in the anglicized version of the basic text would actually go in, sorry, in the Little Booklet, I beg your pardon, go into the new 6th edition if the motion was passed. And similarly with Spanish, Afrikaans, a number of other regions which already have a Little White Booklet as translated, and this and through the process that this motion describes.
Yeah, hi, my name is Andy. I'm an addict. Regarding the motion 6, thank you for reading it out. I have seen the anglicized version. I was just curious though, because I've also been in other countries where basically their translated version is really only those first 6 chapters. And so they don't have, at least where I was living before in Poland, they didn't have their own Little White Booklet. So I was wondering, like, is this also stating that they would be able to just take 6 stories from the basic text, the 6th edition, and print them or translate them and print them with their translated version of the, or is it just simply those who have made their own white booklet are allowed to have it with the stories that have been printed in the basic text, if I understand correctly?
Thank you, Andy. The motion addresses this addresses translated versions of the basic text in regions which have their own little white booklet with their local stories in them approved. And you're absolutely, I completely agree. Currently, most of the translations that are available are the 5th edition basic text, book 1 without the story. But of course, it would be more helpful if a 6th edition translation was available. That's really up to local translation committees.
But this does not concern them translating stories. Okay.
Absolutely not. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's great.
Okay. Motion 7. So motion 7 speaks about the disruption that happened, the cycle, because of the, sorry, just a second. Sorry about that. So disruption that caused by the pandemic means that 6 board members' terms are currently due to expire in 2024, which will be mid-cycle. So the World Board is responsible for overseeing the work of the WSC, and it doesn't make sense their terms expire mid-cycle. World Board members are elected to 6-year terms and are eligible to serve for 2 years. And this is a motion similar to one that was passed with unanimous support at the interim WSC in 2022 to extend the 3 World Board member terms by 1 year until 2023, so that those board members would not expire in mid-cycle. And depending on the outcome of motion 9 to adjust the length of the conference cycle, motion 7 would extend the terms by either 1 or 2 years. And this motion does not create a permanent change to policy that defines the length of the board's service terms. So the motion is to extend the 6 World Board members' terms currently expiring in 2024 through the end of the upcoming World Service Conference cycle. The intent is to accommodate the change to a WSC cycle that has already occurred and avoid World Board terms ending in the middle of a conference cycle.
No questions from the room. Any questions from online?
We have one back here.
Editing Patty. Hey, so I've heard a lot of debates and other workshops about rotation of service. This motion makes a lot of sense to me. I'm just wondering, when do the other 6 board member terms expire? And if motion 9 to have the cycle be 3 years is passed, are we looking at altering their terms too, just to get ahead of the questions I think I can anticipate?
Could I answer that, Ahmed, please? Yeah. As I'm one of the 6 World Board members who this directly affects. Okay, so the other 7 World Board members, because there are 13 at the moment, have varying lengths of term left. So it would depend on when they were elected. I don't think I can tell you. I don't think I can tell you actually what dates they were all elected, but that information is available and has been published in Law's News. The situation at the moment is that there are 5 members who have been serving for the last 10 years. And obviously we're in a situation where the World Service Conference and the World Convention would only be, there would only be between 7 and 9 members to do the work, to cover those things. The board would be severely depleted to do these tasks. That's the whole rationale behind this. Does that help with your question?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Next motion.
Here we are. Next motion. And it's the last one. Okay. The final motion in this PowerPoint relates to the World Convention rotation policy contained in a guide to world services in NA. And we have our World Convention guidelines, which, because they are in a guide to world services NA, which is presented to the conference and approved at each conference cycle, is WSC approved service material. Can we move on? And the motion, as you understand, is about addressing the same issue that we were addressing in the last motion. As a result of the COVID pandemic, to suspend the World Convention of Narcotics Anonymous, WCNA, rotation policy after 2024, to allow the World Board to determine what is possible and practical moving forward, and then seek approval from conference participants. And given the disruption in the rotation of WSC and WCNA that has already occurred, the increases in event costs and the other changes brought about by the pandemic, to allow an evaluation by the World Board and approval by conference participants for what is possible and practical in the future. And the policy affected can be found on page 29 of the CAR. If the motion is adopted, a note would be added to the policy on page 47 of A Guide to World Services in Narcotics Anonymous, that this rotation plan is suspended until a new decision can be made. Next, please. Okay, unless you'd like me to, I won't read the motion again, as I've just read it and read the intent. So shall we open this up for discussion or any questions, please?
Adam?
Morning, everyone. Name's Adam. I'm an addict. And good to see you all. Just to so we're not only talking about the inside the US, outside the US rotation, but the 3 years as well, correct?
We are looking at all aspects of what the new policy is going to be, because as I'm sure we all understand, the game has changed completely. World economic change, prices, all those kinds of things. So the motion is asking the fellowship to trust the World Board to do the research necessary to produce a detailed report and some proposals for a future World Service Convention rotation plan.
Oh, okay. I guess my head was thinking that it would just be that the World Board would kind of handle it, and for every world convention, the World Board would just present the proposal, say, hey, we think we're going to have the next World Convention in 2028 in here, and we'd vote on it or not. I didn't realize it would be on the new policy per se. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
We have a question?
I think you're muted, Plain States.
No, go.
Is there
any rough idea of when you would be able to get back with us about a timeline moving forward? That way we can take it back and say it's not indefinitely, it's just indefinitely. You know, we're expecting an update from them in 18 months, 2 years, kind of a deal.
This would actually be a change to the Guide to World Services. So, because currently the rotation plan is something which is published in the Guide to World Services. So currently we would be saying that it would be either at the findings and a proposal would be presented at the next World Service Conference, which could be in 2 years or 3 years, depending on whether the motion to extend the conference cycle by 1 year or not is passed.
And so it wouldn't be at, say, like, you don't project to have anything at, say, the interim, any of the interim meetings.
If we have.
If we have it.
I mean, well, look, the next World Convention is going to be in Washington, D.C. That's fixed. Okay, we're talking about the rotation process after that.
Okay. Okay.
So, and I'm assuming that it's probably going to be something which would be a piece of work which would take until the next conference to actually be able to publish something which was practical and useful and pretty well something that could be actionable. But again, it would be the decision of the fellowship to approve it or not.
Thank you. Any other questions?
So future of this, so we're gonna go through motions 9 to 12, hopefully, if we have time. But so the World Board and other conference participants have had many discussions about what's next for the WSC. And this cycle alone, there have been conference participants webinars dedicated to the subject, a survey for delegates, and a few sessions on the topic at the partial interim WSC in 2022. And these conversations have helped shape some recommendations from the board. We're offering the next 4 motions related to what we've been calling what we've been calling the future of the WSC. So motion 9 is to try a 3-year cycle, 3-year WSC cycle, and motions 10 and 11 will only be offered if motion 9 passes. Motion 10 is to hold a interim virtual WSC in between in-person meetings, and motion 11 is to post the CAR 6 months before the in-person WSC. And motion 12 is to make delegate funding available upon request instead of automatic. So motion 9 speaks to approve a 3-year World Service Conference cycle on a trial basis following WSC 2023 through WSC 2029. Following 2029, the WSC cycle would return to 2 years unless another decision is made. The intent is to put into practice some of what we've learned during the pandemic so that we can shift more resources to work more directly, to work that more directly carries the message. This would bring the WSC resource allocation in line with other changes that have been made in World Services. So cuts in staff levels and 50% reduction in in-person board meetings. And the policy affected, if this motion is adopted, a footnote would be added in GWISNA, Guide to World Services in NA, about this trial. So references to biennial and 2-year would be changed. Examples are included below to give a sense. I don't know if they are below. Yeah, they are below. To give a sense of the changes throughout all the changes that will be included in the draft of Quizna distributed to the CPs. So could you go? Yeah, here they are.
Questions?
Workshop this so much that we're all pretty familiar with these motions. With the CP webinars and such.
Room feels pretty comfortable that they're good with the motions. They've workshopped them enough. Any discussion online?
Motion 10, if motion 9 is adopted, as Hamed said, to approve an interim virtual WSC in the middle of the conference cycle for decisions which are legally necessary and those that conference participants choose to address. As was done in the 2020 to 2023 cycle, material would be posted on NA.Org under the same deadline policies as the CAT, 90 days prior, and all voting conference participants would be polled to choose the items they wish to address. And the intent is to allow conference participants to address some WSC business between in-person conference meetings. And some of that has to be legally necessary decisions, which are legally necessary because Narcotics Anonymous World Services is registered in the state of California as a not-for-profit organization, and so has to fulfill certain legal requirements. I hope that's enough information. Shall we open up for discussion?
Any discussion? Andy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andy, I'm an addict. So I was just curious, how did the WSC feel like, I mean, in your opinion, Paul and Danny and Ahmed, how did you feel that the interim virtual meeting went? Did it feel like it was even necessary? Or, I mean, I know at this time it was bonkers, but yeah, I'm curious, like, how did it even seem, like, did it seem necessary or important or useful?
Well, thank you very much, Andy. That's a great question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me publicly how I felt about anything to do with World Services, so I'll do my best to answer that now. It was a very important thing that we did. I mean, it would have been remiss of the fellowship not to have that meeting in the chaotic situation that we were in. So it was necessary. And of course, like whenever we go where no man has ever been before, or any woman for that matter, it was strange. You know, we were in strange territory. But I felt okay with it. I'd like to pass the question over to my board colleagues now, to Danny and to Hamed.
Yeah, honestly, in my opinion, it was important for, well, many reasons. For basically, so the straightforward answer was it was important for us to get some of the legal business done. But on another level, it was important for us to connect as a fellowship. And I think that was something that, well, I needed. And it was, in my opinion, like the first one was it was hard because we were going through all the, operations of it. But the second one, in my opinion, was, even better. We adapted quick. We were amazing. In my opinion, we did really well. So yeah, I do think it is important.
So I want to say a few things. One is a virtual WSC is not a replacement for all aspects of what happens at a World Service Conference. For anyone that hasn't been to an in-person WSC, what we did at WSC 2020 and 2022 is only a fraction of what happens at a World Service Conference. And without actually being present there and seeing the community building that happens, the small group discussions, things that don't necessarily happen in the risers and in the hallways, you can't really capture all of that using things like Zoom and breakouts and not having everybody in the same physical location on the same time zone. That being said, WSC 2020 was not really planned. It just happened. And WSC 2022 was also not really, we had no template and it wasn't really planned. So what's being proposed in motion number 10 will not probably be much like what happened in WSC 2022, because we didn't really have a time to plan out and poll the conference participants on what kinds of ideas. The other thing is that if the motion 9 and 10 pass and the project plan in the CAT for WSC of the future, there will be a work group that will work through ideas to plan out what an interim conference could handle versus what happens at an interim conference. So I think there's a lot of possibility there if the fellowship decides to move ahead with a 3-year cycle as to what you could tackle mid-cycle or 2/3 of the way through. It represents a lot of creativity to possibly address some of the things that have been brought out in multiple CAR workshops regarding how projects are introduced and how we actually work through some of those, some of the strategic planning.
Thanks, Danny. So there you are, Andy. You've got feelings, opinions, and experience from the World Board. Thank you.
We have a question here.
There's also a question in the chat.
My name's Pam. I'm an addict. A couple of things. First, I'll just chime in and say I think that there's great possibilities for an interim virtual decision-making meeting to dispose of things where there's high consensus, if nothing else, as well as the business that can't be delayed. I do hope that we have a better name for it. So we have several interim virtual meetings as conference participants. And I think it blurs the line a little bit just to call it an interim virtual meeting. So I hope we can come up with a better name for it. That's really my only comment on it.
Oh, you mean the ick one? Was that what you're referencing?
Yes. Something more like interim virtual decision-making meeting or something more, where we have a differentiator between our conference participant meetings, because those are important meetings too.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. We will definitely work on a different name.
Well, I don't like the term virtual at all, because virtual sounds to me like not quite real. So if there was some way we could dispose with the word virtual and use another word, I would be happier. But then I am an English professor, and that's the kind of thing that I think about when I can't sleep at night. There we are.
Any other questions?
What was the chat question?
The chat question was, what would be considered legally necessary? And the answer was probably the budget at a minimum from Danny.
Yeah, the budget is legally necessary.
Also, we have to be clear about who are the officers of the World Board. Although the World Board is actually a very democratic body, for the purposes of the 730C status that we have, World Board has to have a chair, vice chair, treasurer, and secretary. So, and those things actually have to be notified. Now, obviously, there are situations where those positions change. I mean, during the last cycle, our chair actually passed away just after being elected. So these are things that we actually have to address. We have to ratify, and it's just one of the questions that we have.
Yeah. Okay, so the next motion is about the car publication, and this is something that we're looking at as a improvement that a 3-year cycle allows, is an earlier release for the car, the conference agenda report. And if motion 11 passes, the English language car for the in-person WSC would be posted 6 months, so 180 days prior to the meeting, with the translated versions posted a month later. This would be 30 days earlier than policy currently requires. So for many, the car comes out at the beginning of a long holiday season, and that can make it challenging to launch workshops about the car and inform members. And we think that 30 days would make a significant difference. So since the onset of the pandemic, World Services has posted electronic versions of the report in NA.org and in a Dropbox for CPs, rather than mailing paper copies. And the largest part of the expenses for paper publications in the past has been translations and mailing. This has worked well for the past 3 years and seems like the most prudent approach, particularly with the cost of paper and shipping increasing so dramatically. So motion 11 states, if motion 9 is adopted, to approve a change to the release of the conference agenda report to be 30 days earlier than the current policy of 150 days prior to the start of the World Service Conference. The new car release day would be 180 days prior to the in-person WSC meeting for English, 150 days for translated version. The deadline for the finalization of regional and zonal motions would be 270 days. The conference agenda report will be posted on NA.org at no cost to members. The intent is to release the car earlier to allow more time for its review.
Any questions?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, no questions here. Adam?
There's one in the chat too.
Yes. So if this were to pass the 3-year trial period and the publishing the car a month earlier, what would the effective work cycle be? How long would it be? Because I know that was one of the major points when we switched from a 90-day to 120-day, or 90-day to whatever it was, 90-day to 150-day was the effective work cycle. So just curious about that. I haven't done the math.
So if if I'm not mistaken, 180 days. So 6 months is 180 days. I think 270 would be 9 months. Correct me if I'm wrong. And basically, this is when you would have to finalize the regional and zonal motions. So that would make it, well, this is only if it's a 3-year cycle. So that would make it 2 years and a couple of months, like 2 years and 3 months. Does that make sense? Or is that, was that your question?
Yeah, kind of, but I guess so. But like the World Board normally meets what, a month after the conference is over to kind of really start their cycle or
Yeah,
your
we
cycle?
meet every month. So ever since the pandemic, we've been meeting monthly, and we have, because it's online, we've actually been able to meet a lot more. So we start the cycle immediately a month after. That is correct. Or I think it's yeah, it's a month after. And that would make it around 2 years and 3 months.
And how
So
long?
it's longer than what it would be longer than what it is now, because
Yep.
now is 2 years, but was now it's basically 18 months, a little bit less.
Right. All right, and then it's part of that you're forming project work groups and stuff like
Exactly.
that. Right? So, yeah, I just want to make sure I'm clear on, obviously I foresee that if this goes well, then we're going to look at a permanent 3-year cycle and et cetera, and what does that really mean to us in terms of how long we have to work on projects in between and with the car coming out earlier and stuff like that. So. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that is a good question. Like we have somewhere in this PowerPoint of like an example of what we could accomplish in a 3-year cycle, because we sort of are in a 3-year cycle, and we've had like a list of, basically living proof of all the things that we could have had done. And I do believe it's somewhere in the PowerPoint. You can take a look at it. It would give you an example of how much work could be done and what could be done and accomplished.
Thank you, Hamid.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat. How was the 30-day earlier release date determined?
So this is something I believe on what, so when we say 30 days earlier, we want to make sure that we can actually deliver on the promise. And that is the best we could come up with given the resources and basically all the projects in between. If anyone else like from the board has a better answer to that.
Yeah, I think it's possible in the future, like, to just piggyback onto Pam's question, who asked about why wasn't the cat also included. I think this is a first pass. We didn't want to load up the car the car with a bunch of
and the cat
more. Yeah, the car and the cat with a bunch more ideas. There's a great section in the car that kind of enumerates some of the other ideas that we've heard in workshops. And we've heard before also at workshops about the cat coming out sooner. So, I think, first, is the conference in favor of a 3-year cycle? And here are some other maybe minor steps we could take along with this first sort of cycle of experimentation. And perhaps in the second cycle of the experiment, the ideas that are continued to be brought forward by the work group and the fellowship could be implemented in the second cycle or perhaps mid-cycle, because we do have CP webinars and we have the interim cycle. So, again, I think this is a first pass. It's not written GWISMA is not written in stone. It changes all the time, and each conference is cycle is always uniquely its own thing. And so we're just asking, let's try something out and see how it goes. And let's take an iterative approach and see, basically the agile methodology is you do minor things and you gather feedback and then you iterate on that. You do a retrospective and decide whether or not those things are working. And the conference is always in a spirit of experimentation. It took us a decade to decide to move ahead with consensus-based decision-making. And so, we want to take baby steps forward, not necessarily make large changes. And again, like Hamid said, take the resource constraint into consideration because we're still not operating at 100%. So we don't want to overcommit to something with the resources that we have right now.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Danny.
And with Kelly's question, I mean, I don't think it's up to the board being open. I think it's a collaborative process. And we do need to consider, the board's position on it would be like, is this going to be doable from a resourcing perspective? So there are parameters there, but I would say, everything is on the table in terms of what could be done.
Yeah, exactly. Any other questions?
Okay, opt-in funding, asking that participant funding be opt-in rather than opt-out. Any delegate from a seated region or zone who requests funding will receive it. Currently, World Services automatically funds, including travel, food and lodging, all delegates from seated regions and zones. Talking about the cost of the WSC and the possibility for regions to fund their delegates has made a difference. And I will add that funding has been available to all delegates unless their region chooses to opt out. So for a number of, most of the conferences that I've been to, which isn't all of them, some regions have actually said, well, we've got enough money. We don't want to take any money from World Services. So we won't actually accept the automatic funding, which is, great. It's their choice. Can we move on to the next one, please? So this is basically, the idea is rather than opting out of funding to opt into funding. So the motion is to change the current policy of NA World Services automatically funding delegates from seated regions and zones to the WSC to funding available on request. And the intent is to encourage service bodies to fund their delegates, but to ensure that regions and zones that need the funding are able to have it. So if any region or zone actually needs funding to attend that World Service Conference, it will be available, but it's an opt-in rather than opt-out to receive funding. And the policy affected is there on the screen. I will read it. It's from Guide to World Services NA, page 31. The operational guidelines of the WSC, number 4. The World Service Conference offers funding on request for the attendance of a delegate from each seated region or zone to the meeting of the WSC. This fund includes travel, lodging and meal expenses only. This policy covers all currently seated regions and zones that have attended one of the past 3 conferences. And number 5, any zonal forum with 2 or more zonally seated regions or communities that are not seated at the World Service Conference may choose to send 1 zonal delegate and alternate to the World Service Conference to represent those regions or communities. So this is the motion and that is the intent. I won't read it again unless people request that I do so. Otherwise, shall we open it up for discussion and questions, please?
Any questions? None here. All right. Well, it is our lunchtime. We have the car survey and the HRP report after lunch.